Hi, everybody. Um, it might be a little dark, and if I go a little forward, it's a little lighter. You know, I'm not sure whether it is. Turn it off again. Yeah, it probably is. Okay, we only have one question so far tonight. It's from Maria Stewart, and she says, if the purpose of spiritual process is to transmute matter, that is, reveal the spirit in matter, once the process is fully realized, what happens to the material plane and how does it affect the other planes? I think there's a bit of a dilemma here. Just a kind of a bit of a misunderstanding. It's true that we are matter. It's true that we look to other levels or other beings as matter. But in fact, what we are is an aspect of spirit. The dilemma really is more to the degree of understanding that we are looking for perception. Our dilemma here is that we perceive matter and us as matter when we're not. So our focus is basically on the relationship that we have with our personalities, our identities, and we call that the matter world. So it isn't so much to transmute matter, it's to engage with and begin to understand our relationship with our conscious awareness, because it's our conscious awareness at different states that allow us to understand and perceive spiritual flow, or this universal flow that is implied by transmutation, and engage with in a kind of a way by transmutation. So to enable our idea is to enable conscious awareness to broaden, and thus the spiritual aspect is perceived in matter as an expression of spirit at this level. Okay. So if you take a look at that for a second, and what you're really doing is broadening what you're perceiving here. At this level, gosh, really complicated situation. And I have to be a little careful with this, because when you're talking about an extension of conscious awareness, you're talking about an extension of conscious awareness, which I'm trying to talk about. And people who have a little bit of an extended awareness begin to align that awareness with spiritual engagement or spiritual perception, while in fact it is just an extension of your personalized conscious awareness. For example, clairaudience, um, clairvoyance, clairsentience, so to speak, becoming more empathic. And then we jump to the idea of thinking about, if you can try to think about this, we think about information and material that we have gained by reading, by listening to others, and therefore we begin to acknowledge that we have broadened our sense of what we know and how we see things and how we value things mentally. And that's part of our personality. So our personality, in fact, is broadened because we focus on the importance of the individual, us in that case, if that happens to be true, becoming more important because we broadened our capacity to perceive or understand. Now I'm going to move this forward so I can see me better. There you go. That might be better. If I can see me better, I'm assuming you can see me better. Whatever that means. Now it went dark again. Now it's light. So what we have at our disposal here is a broadening at the level of the personality. You think about this. And you believe that you are the personality. So that's broadened. Therefore, how you appear to others within the context of your engagement with others, how you communicate with others is broadened. As they see you is broadened. And therefore you think, well, no, that's spiritual growth. In fact, that isn't what I'm talking about at all. Although it's slightly a little bit involved with that. You can have tremendous clairvoyance, tremendous clairaudience, whatever it's focused on, and be very sensitive to others and not necessarily be spiritual in the manner that I'm trying to express. So I can see how confusing that would be. So, in fact, there's a relationship that we have within ourselves that we're not aware of that relates to spiritual engagement or spiritual growth. How you define it or describe it may allow you to notice a relationship with somewhat a spiritual growth. But the personality itself goes through a process of becoming able to see itself. It's a very important statement from my perspective. Because as you begin to perceive yourself, you begin to notice that there are pieces and places where you don't see anything. It's as if you're noticing spaces inside the personality. And you quickly move to fill those spaces with description, recognition of an importance, a value to you or a non-value, depending on how your past experience has been and your personal, let's say, personality, identity, development has been. And what you're doing there is missing the point and gaining the point at the same time. It's a paradox. What you're trying to do is realize one very necessary thing. You are a form, material, as Maria says. But you also have a spiritual flow inside you. Hard to believe that's possible if you don't have the experience. Okay. So now you know that you can broaden out your personality and be important or do something really well and people will praise you as really being able. But that's not spiritual growth. That's the development of a personality. It's not negative at all. It's a personality. So, as you are perceiving what lies within you, as you're perceiving what lies within you, you begin to notice something different than what you're normally used to. And what you're normally used to is your personality itself. You see that, oh, this is how I operate. Oh, that's what I do. My goodness, I never knew that. And you're having a dialogue with you. You, the observer, who is now consciously aware of what you are like as you play your engagement with life. In through that, you begin to notice in those spaces that I'm talking a flow of energy, a sense that there is literally energy flowing through you. At the same time, you're noticing others have the same energy flowing through them, or a similar energy, or it's energy itself flowing through you, through them. And engaging with that individual makes you realize suddenly you are noticing things that are playing really clearly from your perspective, because you're in a bit of a shift of state into a point where you're watching instead of claiming a point of reference that relates to your personality. You're not watching from it, kind of. You're kind of watching from another state, while noticing that that personality state is the state through which you speak, or engage, or think. But still, it's an aspect that is slightly different than you're engaged. It's out of phase with the normal language that I would use. But let's say if this is your personality and it's on a flat plane, it's as if you're watching like this. So from here, you can watch this flat plane. But you can also watch others in their relationship with their flat plane. It's not negative. It's how we do it here. So we're engaged with and focused on, and literally, at least primarily engaged with how we appear to others, how we appear to ourselves. And we're not always capable of seeing how we function. We're only seeing it from an angle that we're normally used to seeing it from. So now, as you perceive energy in and through you, that is noting that there is always energy flowing through you. Now, if you stop right there, then you could say the matter world is infused with energy flowing through it. It is an aspect of the spiritual plane. But it has lost contact with the perception of that flow through. So you're attempting to gain access to a perception of that flow through. If everyone in the universe has it, it's not extra special. It's just unknown. So as you become more spiritual, you're not extra special. You just know now. And knowing adds to an understanding. And recognition helps you to realize that your relationship with the matter world is still there. It's just that you can perceive it differently. And you don't necessarily have to agree with it. Because in that, you would note that your habitual way of engaging may not be how you want to, well, shifting back into the personality, want to be seen as, engaged with. You don't want to see it in yourself. Well, there are things that are not so terrific always, quotation mark, but not so bad always either. So we're broadening out our understanding of a tremendous being that up till now you've not noticed. And slowly you're gaining access to the vulnerability of finding out. Now in that space, as it broadens, you have to get used to the idea that you're okay. I'm sorry, you are, no matter what. The problem is, as I said before, the reflection of what you've learned is a reflex reaction that occurs in the present. And that's what you defend. You defend the reflex reaction that you've expressed normally without observing you in action. You defend that so that it would remain the same. So you're constantly defending the past. Any change you make in an instant affects the future. 1 second later. So except it also affects your perception. You are intermittently perceiving until you're perceiving all the time. And then you start to notice that the importance of perception starts to be not as real as you thought it was before. Now you are perceiving. Now you know. You are a spiritual being and material being, both. So that could be annoying to people who think that you're a spiritual being, you're more important than anybody else. Well, you are just recognizing something you never noticed before, because you've already been that way. Now, for a material person who's really vulnerable, they might say, well, why do I have to even find out? I'm a spiritual being anyway, so I can do whatever the heck I want, and I'll still be spiritual. Well, that's really interesting theory. But the part that's really broadening out is your relationship with other states. If you engage like that, you will remain on this state and deepen this state. And it will not be very friendly to you. I don't mean in terms of hurting you or being bad. It just pushes you away from being able to change states and understand others and yourself differently, other than the way that you already do. And of course, that's part of the relationship that we're attempting to have with life, engaging at another level, a different state. Because perception is state dependent. If you perceive something and describe it as real according to your way of seeing things, that's state dependent. If you broaden it out and it's at a different level, you will see it from a different perspective. That's also state dependent. There are many levels of state-dependent perception. There are levels of state-dependent perception, spiritually speaking, that relate only to belief. And we've got a number of beliefs on our planet. And therefore, once again, we dip down into the way of seeing that only this way or that way is the right way to be spiritually relating. And in fact, you've forgotten already that every being on the planet is spiritually oriented. And all belief systems are traditionally perceived from the level of engagement that we have in the matter world. And we are trying to perceive it from a different state. If all beings relate to the spiritual level of engagement, then you'll perceive it differently and recognize that there's, boy, do I have to say this out loud, genuinely no difference. All belief systems somewhere agree with each other in relationship to those higher states. At a higher state, there's no interest in having one versus another, one good, one bad, one belief terrific, one belief not, if their belief systems are related to a higher state and can be perceived from a higher state. Then the difficulty is individuals still focused on the matter world cannot perceive from that higher state or spiritual state, so-called. These things are, as you can hear, sound sometimes as if they're separate, spirit and matter. In fact, they never have been separate. They're one. There is a spiritual flow operating through you, even if your focus is only on this level, this matter level. To create a personality, you use the energy coming into you for the purpose of engaging with and relating to and defending against the world that you happen to live in, and engaging with the world you happen to live in. That's a mouthful. So, how you do that is a method It's relative to how you were brought up and how you decided you want to live. If your upbringing was not so terrific, you can work yourself through that and say, whoa, do I have to protect myself now when it's not necessary? Should I keep remembering that? And therefore, that would be the excuse I have for not going beyond that state of engagement that really confines me to this way of acting out in life. You have that right, but it's not as real as you believe it is. Same is true on the other side of things. If you were given everything and you should still think you need to have everything, yet you're right, then you're still involved with the matter world. At a spiritual so-called state, you will see that the need is not as great as you think it is. That's all. Just the need. Not negative. Nothing negative there at all. Nothing negative the other way. Our whole matter world is involved with various kinds of engagement, with how we create a personality to profoundly protect ourselves in a manner that's important and valuable to us. Let me see if there's anything I've left out. I was just making notes before I came because I wanted to be sure I didn't forget anything. So thus the spiritual world is perceived in matter as an expression of spirit at this level. Yeah, I would say. And the material plane is not destroyed, just seen differently as a tool for a spiritual consciousness in the matter orientation revealed to the individual who's grown. Perception is broadened. Movement is advanced at all levels. In other words, you're able to perceive internally differently in some moments of your life, and at the same time, at other moments, you tend to perceive exactly the way you did before. Wow. You mean you just don't turn a key and it's all over, and now you're all spiritual stuff, and therefore you can walk around, blah, 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 I'm now spiritual, and I dealt with everything. Yeah, well, it's state dependent. You walk around saying, oh, I'm really spiritual. Now you got yourself into an identity thing again, and there you are down at the bottom of your engagement. And that's fairly broad in its existence. Take a look from the lowest to the highest of our relationship with this planet. Every individual on it. That's pretty broad. In that, right in that breadth, it's a flat earth. And it changes every little while. You could say we change socially, every 10 years we come up with something different. Or we go back to another 150 years before and replay the whole thing on a different level. Good God, we're doing the same thing all over again. Well, yeah, that's what we do. So, spiritual orientation then is beginning to be able to perceive that act as, my goodness, it's a replay of what we did before and how we did it, or what others have done before. This is really of great value to know. That's why history is so important. We should never allow anybody to stop us from knowing the history of our planet. Otherwise, we forget our propensities to engage in ways that are not that pretty. And we effectively engage with those ways against others who are like us. Excuse me. Unknowing spiritual beings. How does that rack up for you? Well, it doesn't rack up very well for me. But nonetheless, it's part of the, let's say, can I use the word entanglement that we have with our relationship with personal identity and spiritual engagement and hopeful progress. So, what happens if more energy comes in and we begin to be consciously aware of what's going on in our life? This, by the way, is uncomfortable to most. Seeing from that spiritually inclined perspective does not always agree with how we see things from our identities, personalization, this, the eye of perception. It is more focused on what we accumulate and what seems to be of greater value in terms of meaning with respect to us. So, you have 100 people sitting in a room. 100 people can have opinions that are vastly different. Get a little group of 20 in that 100, they become more important than the 80. Get another group of 20, so that's 40. Now you got two opposing groups of 20, and all the rest of them, they haven't declared themselves yet, because they're not sure about what they think yet. If you had a group of 58, and they start to agree, then it's 58 to 40. Even though the 20-20 don't agree with each other, they're opposed to the 58. Get two people, and that's on the identity side of things, personalization. Get two people who glow in a spiritualized orientation at a higher state. And it may soften or it may increase the intensity of the 58 plus 40. And what does that mean then? Well, the good part of this is that they will have an effect on folks who are really held in a belief. They might change 70 to 80% of those who are held in a belief. Just by energy, just by being in a state. Those 80%, even if it was only 51% or 50% of those folks, they may suddenly find themselves thinking beyond the previous belief. If that's true, they will begin to come up with an idea, or begin a different one, or it might come up with the realization that what you're doing is setting up groups of belief to validate those things that are not purely truth. And then they might even figure out that nothing is purely truth. Truth is based on a higher state, not a broadening of a belief. It's very difficult for us on this planet to understand that particular perception, because we're desperately involved with the feudal state. We, those at the top, are right, those at the bottom are wrong. You would like not to think that you're a part of that, but you are. Everyone is. Until the shift in state can allow you to begin to have a thought that is not common to the thinking process that you normally engage with. You can call it intuition, or you can call it a shift in conscious awareness. Intuition is something like, I had an idea, don't know where it came from, but it seems really valuable, that might be helpful. Shift in state of consciousness, and that is, by the way, an idea coming into your mind, and you're using it because it's your head, and you believe it's a part of your engagement with your intelligence. And it may not be. It might be actually a thought. You had run out of thoughts, and you were focusing vacantly, your mind was quiet, on the hope of coming up with something else, and you couldn't. You let it alone for a while, and suddenly a thought comes in. And another way of thinking, you can lean into a different state through this process of engagement and noticing there are many pauses or spaces within your mental and emotional facilities that you already have. suddenly you could notice that there is a broadening of your mind. The mind that broadens is activated into this mental structure, this form that you call yours, because it is. But you can have many things operate through it that you can call yours or not call yours. But anyway, let's get this one done first. Suddenly, you're noticing that you're kind of in a meditative state. And for those of you who have meditated a lot, you move into a kind of an alpha state, but you're still conscious. And at that conscious alpha state, you begin to be open to not only the thoughts you normally have, but other thoughts that might be actually helpful to you. Because remember, the thoughts you've actually had and continue to have, and the emotional piece that you replay, and the way you think and need to be to be the person that you believe you have to be, that's all defense of the past. And a replay in a current, so that the next instant you can be the same as you were before, plus. So you're constantly identifying with being more important in that state, whatever that is. Of course, this is all unconscious. We don't even notice it. But when you do begin to notice, it's because you're in a different state. Well, hopefully I haven't confused you. But it's very confusing. But it's so simple, it's ridiculous. But it's confusing. Meaning, you have the right not necessarily to agree with you. You do that best from a different perception, a different state. You have the right to agree with you. That's what we do all the time. I know I'm right, blah, 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 blah. Yeah, it could be. If we're lucky, 50-50. If we're not so lucky, 40-60. If we're really not that lucky, 10-80, 10-90. Know where the other 10% will go. But here we are at a different state, and we're looking in, and we're watching ourselves engage with life from a different state, because this is state dependent. And all of a sudden, we perceive ideas, and we express them, and we practice that. That's why teaching is such a fundamentally important thing. We practice engaging at that level, and when nothing is there, we engage with something that we already know. So both states are utilized, but you're always willing to not necessarily agree with what you're saying, so that you can perceive and express slightly differently. In the old days, these used to be called a kind of thinking, kind of an abstract mind. So you could change your mind when you were speaking. It was allowed. And you didn't do it because it made you important because you were doing it. Therefore, that was another descriptive image of spiritual growth. That doesn't help. So all you do is refine the self-identity, or the importance of the personalized description, which is your name or whatever it may be. So when you're in that state, suddenly something else can happen. You can not only express yourself, but you can perceive that flow operating through you. You can perceive where the flow is operating through you. Of course, that brings in the chakras, the Sephiroth, the fireballs, depending what you believe in. And you notice it, and you're watching it, because at this level of mind, it seems you can see more than one place at a time. Some people believe you can only focus on one thing at a time. You see 2, 3, 4, 5 things at a time. Now, that's a bit rude to the definition. But however, that's what happens. Now here's a dilemma. You're expressing, doing the best you possibly can. And you know in that moment you are learning. You see, in the traditional moments, you already know something. That's why you're speaking it. In these other moments, you are learning from what you are noting in the mind, actually through your mouth, I would actually say, because you're engaging. And you are engaging with a level of mind that does not copy your own intellectual level of mind. It's not always as clear as your minds might be, or you say a sentence and then you add a sentence and you add a sentence, or it can be exceedingly clear and those sentences are perfectly refined. But an idea is attempting to come through your mind, and you're expressing ideas overtly as they're coming through your mind. So you're thinking inside and thinking outside at the same time. And you're listening to the thinking that is going on externally and internally. And that may reshape right in front of your eyes. And so you're watching a level of mind that is being expressed and shaping in front of you with this conscious awareness that you're cultivating at a different state. Now that's most fascinating to me. It hasn't got the surety that relates to a level of belief. It has the surety that relates to a level of movement into a different understanding. Things are changing in a current second, as opposed to reiterating your beliefs that you stand by because they have kept you comfortable up until now. It's fascinating. That's quite a bit different. So it imposes change in the future. Your future, you plus 1 second. You plus a lifetime. And it moves to the point where almost all the time, through a period of time, you are conscious of both. You're actually 3 things. You are conscious of you, your personality. You are conscious of your relationship with your personality. You are conscious of the quietness of the mind. Because the intellect's pretty smart. If it knows there's something smarter than it knows it can use it. That's how it's trained. So it keeps quiet. Goes into a different state. Not dormancy. Active watching. And perceives that which is not normally perceptive. It takes a little while to get there because, in fact, if that is given, then you have to calm down your emotional dispositional process of the defense of the importance of you. Oh boy. Who wants to do that one right away? Well, you don't have to do it right away. In a kind of a way, that's trained in you. Go through a process of training from an internal sight, one could say, an internal level of conscious awareness, where you must attempt to be honest with what's going on inside you, to yourself. Very valuable thing. In doing this, you actually know that you inhabit the form. You inhabit it as a spiritual flow. You are it. You are the spiritual flow. But you are the form. And you are both. You are that which you have trained before. You are the form that can allow that form to change and help to teach it on a daily basis with respect, gradually, instead of a big jump. And as soon as you do it once, you've got it, and that's it. It doesn't work that way. And you can begin to be okay with being that tremendous, virtuous learner. And virtue in the old Greek language meant that you were open to that what lay beyond, as opposed to the adventure of being perfect. sorry, I don't think that's up for grabs for us. I don't think it ever was up for grabs. There's no perfection in this, but this relates to an undying need to follow belief. This perfection, this concept of perfection, is related to an interpretation of the old relationship with universal virtue. And it was misunderstood. Translations probably out of the old Greek. But nonetheless, virtue meant to be honest with oneself internally. Virtuous began to mean, certainly after Christianity, that it began to mean you must be this, you must be that, you must be, if you do this, no, it's not very good. If you do that, you're wrong. And it was not meant to be that. Certainly in Socrates' time, Plato and Aristotle, it was not that way. It was a different meaning. It's worthwhile trying to understand that, I think. So you have the virtue of a willingness to look beyond the self, interest within the self, to look beyond the self-interest, the self-importance, beyond the self. You have that virtue. Virtuous inclination, perhaps, at a different level. And the level is not far off from the surface or from the personality. So therefore, it's an easier lead than what we think it is. So our relationship with the matter world will be here forever, as long as we don't annihilate ourselves, of course. And within it is a fused relationship with the spiritual consciousness, but we have to be okay with letting that out, or letting that be more open, because in truth it does fuse, and if you with the normal personality, and if it fuses, you will notice that the great need you have to become important and dominant isn't like that. The fusion makes it different. You may not want to get rid of that need to be important in the eyes of others. You may not want to do that. So therefore, your conscious awareness will be focused on the importance of you, the movement towards making you more dominant, and that will be involved with spiritual growth. Because the reasoning behind it is that the soul, or the higher aspect, will serve you what you desire, so that you can learn that may not be what you desire. It doesn't want to make you an automaton, beat you up and throw you around like you might want to do in relationship to your own fundamental way of engaging. I mean, beat you up and throw you around, thinking that's the great thing for you. In fact, it takes a willingness to be okay with shifting internally, so that you can begin to notice that may not be exactly what you would like to have happen in your life. However, if you do not experience that spiritual flow, you can easily say it doesn't exist. So some people actually fight against the perception of this. Even if they do get it, they'll say, well, it was only there for a couple of minutes. God, if it was there for a couple of minutes, look out, you're already in it. The problem is you're focused off it. And you're working hard not to be focused on it. Because if you do, your instinct knows, your internal workings knows that changes will occur, and that may not be what you want. So, I said also, perception is broadened, movement is advanced in all levels. Difficulties, I think I said, I can't remember. Okay. are noted. Spiritual awareness becomes a focus and it begins to be remembered by you. Meaning you look for it every day, every time you're up, when you wake up. When you're not awake, you'll notice that it's there. When you are awake, you'll notice it's there. Sometimes you'll be in a state where you'll be sleeping, your body will be sleeping, and your mind will be wide awake, knowing full well that you can perceive that flow moving through you all the time. You're not used to thinking that you're sleeping because your mind is awake. However, you will be sleeping. Your body will be, even your emotions, until you react to being awake in your mind. Then you will wake up your emotion, then wake up your body, and now you'll be awake. Congratulations, just woke yourself up. Just moved out of that state. So the I is less valued as a dominant aspect, but the function of the I, or the perceiving I as importance, moves to a function of perception or watching, or eyes that are noting and watching the actual changes that are going on inside and the occurrence, consistent occurrence of that universal flow. There's much more to this. Some of it I have no idea about. Others I have a tiny bit of idea about. But I think 45 minutes of talking like this is quite enough, probably. And I think I've fairly confused you well enough. But I just want to tell you, Maria, you say once the process is fully, what happens to the material plane? Nothing. It's still here. But it doesn't call you to engage in the way that you used to engage. It's really interesting. I think in the early stages in the 70s, I was worried about the propagation of the species. I thought, my God, what's going to happen as we grow spiritually? We're going to have a disinterest in sexuality. And all of you know that how children happen are women lay eggs, right? No, that's not what happens. So if there is a disinterest in sexuality by both males and females, that might be a problem. And I went through this for a period of time. It wasn't very long, but nonetheless, a month or two. And I realized the most interesting thing is that we all have beliefs around sexuality when we're involved with spiritual growth. Some people believe no sex after you start growing spiritually. Some people believe that it's okay to be a householder, in other words, a partner. The dilemma with both of these is that the focus is on the I. Right? You understand that? You're still focused on the thing that stimulates you every day of your life, your will. You focus on the importance of the body and how it is and all the rest. It's going to be important or not important, the same as it is now, whether you have spiritual growth in you or not. So when you're looking at this, try to look at it from another point of view. Animals have periods of times when they become stimulated so that they can have progeny. And there's periods of estrus. There's periods of engagement. I suspect it's not going to be quite that way with human beings, but it may be more energetically inclined. And in fact, that energy will not allow us not to have progeny, because it is trying to engage with these planets and is engaging by us being here. I find that very interesting. So I don't think it would be counter to that, although still a lot of people tell me, they tell me all kinds of things about, of course you know, Ron, that to really grow, you should be in the Himalayas, in a cave. Well, I've already been warned about that. At one time, might have been my inclination. As an idea, if you've ever been in the Himalayas, when it's snowing, And when it's ice from here to there and everywhere else, and you're trying to take a breath in minus 20 or minus 30 or minus 40, and the wind is so heavy at night that it freezes almost everything, including you, and you're duct up in a building, and you've got a fire going on in a fireplace that just doesn't cut it. A cave isn't as appealing as you might think it is. But the issue is we have all these idealistic ways of engaging and seeing things. If you've ever done this before, you probably had a fairly short life. That's not negating your life, because you were probably focused on the attempt and your will was strong to engage with spiritual growth. That does not diminish from lifetime to lifetime. So it's not a negative thing. But it's when it's cold, it's blooming cold. I've talked to people who have literally died in the wintertime in the Himalayas, prior to their death, of course, just in case you're wondering. And they were, one was a naked yogi who was head on, and he had been in the Himalayas roughly 7 or 8 years, maybe 9. And every year he was naked in the Himalayas, walked in the snow and had a cave and all the rest of it. Unfortunately, he died at an age of about 34, 35, maybe a little less, and from the cold. The physical body is a form. He couldn't get his body hot enough, and that's always a possibility. Ideals and descriptions of ideals are different than actual occurrences. So, even identities conceived of by us, engaged with by us, considered by us to be the perfect identity as we live and breathe in them, because they remind us how great they are, and how wondrous they are from time to time, are just ideals, kind of middling ideals that we value. And it doesn't necessarily mean that we are at any given moment the ideal that should be maintained. Attempting to grow spiritually consistently is an ideal, of course. But as you begin to become more conscious of that flow, at least you have a little bit of that conscious awareness, and you can continue to engage with it as you meditate, as you begin to look internally, as if you're watching everything, but not with a heavy hand, with a kind hand. Say, whoop, I missed that one. Oh, there it is. Look, it just happened. You're not telling anybody else. You're telling you. So you are learning from that. So learn. Be respectful of the form that you already have, and be respectful of the attempts that you make to adjust those systems the very best you can. None of us are perfect. Perfection is not the ideal state of engagement with consciousness prior to conscious awareness. You don't have to be perfect to be on a movement towards becoming more able to handle flow, that universal flow, that spiritual flow, so to speak. Maria, I wish you well. I hope that made some sense, and good night, everybody.